Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the start of the Fall 2023 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover proposal preparation at NSF.
Thanks, everyone. We're delighted to have you with us today for the first session, as Jeremy mentioned, of the Fall 2023 Virtual Grants Conference. This is one of the most widely attended sessions of the Grants Conference, and we're certainly delighted that you are all here with us, and look forward to all those questions that you may have as a result of listening to what we have to present to you today. Next slide, please. My name is Jean Feldman. I'm head of the policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support, which is located in the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. I'm really delighted to be joined by two colleagues from our program directorates at NSF, and I'd like for each of them to introduce themselves. Randy, could you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Hi there, and thank you for attending this session. My name is Randy Phelps. Just for information purposes, my PhD is in physics and astronomy, but I'm a staff associate in the Office of Integrative Activities, which resides in the Directorate. I'm the coordinator for the Research Instrumentation Program and our mid-scale research infrastructure, at least one of the components of that program, the smaller up to $20 million program. So I will turn it then over to Jennifer Wade.
Thanks, Randy. And hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Wade. I'm a program director in the Division of Earth Sciences, which is in the Directorate for Geosciences, and I manage the Petrology and Geochemistry program. It's great to have you all here.
Well, thanks to both of you. Next slide, please. So we've got a lot that we are going to be covering as part of today's presentation. As I've already mentioned, we've got a lot of opportunity built in here for you to ask those questions so that we keep this as engaged as possible. The first part of thing that we're going to address is finding of NSF funding opportunities. Obviously, something very important that you need to understand in order to navigate and your interactions with NSF. We're going to talk a bit about the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. Obviously, that is the backbone to our proposal and award process here at NSF. We're going to talk about the types of proposal submission, what the differences are, and how you might use those in terms of your interactions with NSF. We're going to talk about the sections of an NSF proposal. And this is very, very important because people are typically used, and rightfully so, of thinking about the project description and project summary as being absolutely what they submit to NSF. And while the other parts are important, they don't have that same level of importance. And we're here to try to tell you and convince you that that's not necessarily the case, that every part of an NSF section of an NSF proposal is important and is how reviewers will be, and NSF program staff will be assessing that proposal. Finally, we're going to go into postdoc mentoring plans and data management plans. Those are required supplementary documents for NSF proposals, postdoc, if you have a postdoc on line B1, and we'll be going into that in a bit more detail. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jen Wade, and she's going to start getting into the details. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. So there are a few different ways to find funding opportunities and other information at nsf.gov. So first, you can just go straight to the Find Funding and Apply tab along the top of the website and get a lot of the information that we're presenting today. Next slide. So you can find how to prepare your proposal, submit your proposal, information about the merit review process, and you can search for funding opportunities to see what's already been funded in your area. Next slide. So if you go to the search for funding part of that page we were just on, you can really search for opportunities by keyword. So this is super helpful if you're not sure where your research might fit. So I can type a keyword in here and it'll bring up a list of awards. I can find out who was funded, at what institution, for how much money, by what program. And so again, this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out what program at NSF your research fits into. Next slide. Okay, and there's also grants.gov, which has a similar keyword search option to look for your own topic and lots of resources to see which programs, not just at NSF, but also other agencies have fund and might fund work in your area. Next slide. Okay, so once you know what program that you want to apply to, you need to get a proposal together. And the first document to be familiar with is the PAPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. This document is incredibly useful, and it tells you almost everything you need to know about submitting to NSF. And it's important to keep in mind that it's updated every year, so you always want to make sure you're working from the most recent version. So the PAPG is split into two parts: proposal prep and submission, and then award administration. So let's talk about what is inside. Next slide. So the PAPG gives you the basic guidelines for preparing and submitting proposals. Fundamental. It tells you how proposals will be reviewed. It also explains why a proposal might be returned without review. It even tells you how to withdraw a proposal if you need to do that. So also, if you get an NSF award, congratulations, you still need this document because it includes all the policies and that you and your institution need to know to manage that grant or that cooperative agreement. Next slide. Okay, so the proposal guide also lays out the different kinds of funding opportunities that exist at NSF, and each one is a little bit different. So we want to make sure you understand which kind of opportunity you're submitting to before you start preparing a proposal. So program descriptions and program announcements, these basically follow the instructions in the PAPG. Everything that's in that document will prepare you to submit to either of those two. Program solicitations follow the guidance in the PAPG, but they also might have other requirements that either are added on to the PAPG requirements in addition to them, might have a couple of deviations from the PAPG. It's really important to read the program solicitations. I think most programs at NSF have these. My program has a solicitation. So for example, if you're doing field work on an active volcano, we require that you write a field safety protocol in your project description. So things like that you can find within the solicitations. And so you want to make sure you're familiar with both the PAPG and the solicitation. And then there's Dear Colleague letters, which sort of come out in real time. They're notifications of opportunities and special competitions, maybe for supplements to existing awards, or maybe just expressions of interest, maybe between a group of programs that see a topic that they want to encourage proposals in. So it's important to sort of know which kind of opportunity you're submitting to, so you know which guidelines you want to pay attention to. Next slide. Okay, so for any opportunity, you want to understand a few key components. First, the goal of the program. So does your proposed research, your institution, you as a PI, do your goals match the goal of that program? The second is eligibility. So there are a lot of reasons that you as a PI or something about your institution where you work might be eligible or ineligible to apply for certain opportunities. So you want to make sure whether or not you can submit to something before you do all that work to submit, right? And then the third thing you want to make sure is that you're meeting any special proposal preparation or award requirements that are specific to that program or announcement, like I just mentioned, making sure you know what are the requirements for the given opportunity. And again, the way to find that out is to read the details of whatever you're submitting to. And on those pages, they always have the contact information for if you have questions, reach out and ask them. Okay, next slide. I think the majority of funding opportunities at NSF, as I said, involve a solicitation. So we'll use this as an example of how to figure out whether an opportunity is right for you. So this is a screenshot of NSF Includes, their solicitation. So you can see there's a solicitation number up at the top that's really helpful to ensure you're applying to the right place and it's the most recent version of that solicitation, because again, they do change. The solicitation will tell you which directorates or offices are participating in that program, and then it will describe any recent revisions. So even if you're really familiar with a program, you want to keep in mind that we do revise them fairly often, some pretty often. And so even if it's a program that you've submitted to before, you want to make sure that you check, make sure, again, it's the current version. Next slide. So on the cover of the solicitation, it will also tell you how many awards that program expects to make and how much money that program expects to have to spend. And this can give you a sense of what size budget you can ask this program to support for your own proposal. Next slide. Okay, the next part of a solicitation will tell you that critical eligibility information. So what kinds of institutions can submit? Who can be a PI? Is there a limit on how many proposals per organization or per PI can be submitted to this program? And this is really important, for example, if it's one of the programs to which a bunch of people at your institution might be applying, right? You want to know before you submit whether there's a limit. Next slide. Okay. Some solicitations have requirements before you even submit a full proposal. So let's walk through what some of those are. So a solicitation might require that you submit a concept outline before a full proposal. Basically, this is a short summary of a project with keywords or any other required info that you send to the program so they can decide whether the topic's appropriate for the funding opportunity. So this is helpful to you so you don't build a full proposal to this program if it's not the right fit. Next. Okay, another kind of pre-submission requirement is a letter of intent. So letters of intent are short documents that a PI will submit saying that you intend to submit a full proposal to a program, right? And if it's required, it'll say so in the solicitation. So they're not always required. It's not a binding document. You're not like required to submit a full proposal if you submit a letter of intent. It's just something that programs use, especially programs that are either really, really big, or maybe it's a new program. So the program's unclear how many proposals might come in. They need to figure out what to prepare for. We use them. We use the letters of intent to sort of plan ahead. What will we need in terms of program staff, in terms of reviewers, in terms of panelists? Next slide. Okay, preliminary proposals are a little bit longer than a letter of intent, and they can serve another purpose. So they do help the program plan ahead in terms of reviewers and staff, but it may also be used as a sort of preliminary round of review. So it might be that you submit a preliminary proposal and then you are not invited to submit a full proposal because the program doesn't think the project is the right fit. So this saves you as a PI like from writing a whole proposal and helps us at NSF make sure that we're considering the projects that are best aligned with the program goals. So again, it's really important to read the solicitation or the Dear Colleague letter or whatever opportunity you're responding to make sure you understand what's required, not just when you're submitting a full proposal, but before you submit that full proposal. Next slide. Okay, so speaking of submission, you might be wondering, when are all these things due? You go to the solicitation or the program announcement. They are full of information and will tell you whether there's a deadline that you need to submit to. Or some programs, like mine actually, have no deadlines. And so a proposal can be submitted anytime that it's ready to go. So some programs, no deadlines. Next. Some programs have target dates, which means there's sort of a semi-rigid deadline. So the program wants proposals to come in by a certain date, but they might be flexible for certain reasons. So it's always critical to contact the program directors if you think you might miss the target date and need that flexibility. And it really varies depending on the situation and on the program, whether you'll get that flexibility. Next slide. So the most firm type is, of course, a deadline date, which means proposals will not be accepted at all beyond 5 p.m. the submitter's local time. So deadlines cannot move unless something truly exceptional happens to a broad set of people, like a natural disaster. So these are the submission types that we always remind people to start working towards very early, just in case. Next slide. Okay, and lastly, there's something called a submission window, which sort of acts like a deadline, but there's also a starting date for submissions too. So basically, it's a designated window of time to submit, but just like the regular deadline, the end of that window is firm. So if you have questions about timelines and deadline types, read the funding opportunity closely. It will explain it. Reach out to the program with questions beforehand. You'll hear us say this 1,000 times today, I think. Always reach out with questions because it's a lot easier to fix things before something has been submitted to NSF than after, and that's what we're here for. Okay,
Jen,
so
can I make a comment here, because we've got the various types of due dates, if you will. Everything's shown on the screen like you've described, from target date to deadline date to submission window. But given the status of things in the world, there are often natural or anthropogenic events. And we do get questions every time there is one about, is NSF going to put something out on the street about this? Is NSF going to unilaterally extend the deadline? Should we be waiting for that? And I just want to let you know the PAP guide does include coverage on natural or anthropogenic events and what you should do if you experience one of those. So I didn't want to leave this section without just identifying that there is coverage in the section on the due dates, and it does tell you exactly what you need to do if you experience one of these events. And again, you could be waiting for NSF to take action, and we don't, because in any given day of the year, there could be an event that we are not aware of that may occur in your area. So I just wanted to point that out, because we get so many questions, that it is worth you understanding that the PAP guide does accommodate that and does have specific guidance on what you should do if you experience one of those events. Sorry to interrupt that.
no, that's perfect. Thanks, Jean. And now I think Randy's going to take over for the next part.
I think I am, but I think I will chime in on that last question and just make sure you understand what a natural or anthropogenic event is. As I mentioned, I coordinate the Major Research Instrumentation Program, which gets hundreds of proposals each submission deadline, and we often get questions about late proposals, and there's a very creative way that people use that phrase. So please understand what is intended there. So I will now start talking about some of the components of a proposal, and starting with the single copy document section. And if there's any takeaway that you get out of this slide, it's to understand, again, understand the difference between what is meant by a single copy document and what is generally referred to as a supplemental document, which I'll come across later on. And the big distinction is that single copy documents are for NSF use only and are not provided or seen by the reviewers. So I bring that up. There's some bullets here that I'll get to in a moment. But sometimes, and again, I coordinate the Major Research Instrumentation Program, we often get proposals that the supplemental documents, which are seen by the reviewers, are submitted as a single copy document. And again, those are not seen by reviewers. So that's a mistake in the first regard. So for example, vendor quotes in the instrumentation program are sometimes submitted as a single copy document. And that does no good to the reviewers who don't see those vendor quotes. So please understand the difference between single copy documents and what a loosely defined at the moment, supplemental document is. So there are some examples here of what can go in a single copy document. An authorization to deviate from proposal preparation requirements, and that it was presumably with some conversation with the program officer. So you should document that if that is the case. And the second bullet is particularly interesting, and that's the list of suggested reviewers to include, or specifically not to include. And again, we sometimes get examples where that list of reviewers, I'll point out, not to include, sometimes finds its way into the supplemental documents, which I'll talk about again in a few moments. Remembering that those documents in the supplemental documents are seen by the reviewers. The last thing I think you want to do as a proposal is to have as a supplemental document a list of reviewers not to include. That is not something you want to be made public, so you submit that as a single copy document, which NSF program officers and other staff are the ones who will only see those documents. And again, proprietary or privileged information, patent applications, for example, or things that are very sensitive, don't want the general community allowable by a solicitation, and that's a key as well. Make sure that what you are planning to submit is submitted by the allowances in a program solicitation. And specific program proposal certifications by the institution or the organization that are not otherwise covered elsewhere in the proposal, for example, by checking boxes in the cover sheet. So next slide, please. There are a number of required sections of a research proposal or even an instrumentation proposal. And again, solicitations document what is required and what the deviations from the PAP guide might be. And I again encourage you, you've seen earlier, that instructions in a solicitation take precedent, if you will, over the PAP guide instructions if they conflict. So please make sure that you understand not only the PAP guide, but all of the details in the program solicitation. So these required documents are listed here, and we're going to cover a lot of them as we go through this. So I don't think I really want to highlight them, but just remember that the PAP guide talks about page limits and required formats for these particular sections, and the solicitations, if that is appropriate, or program announcements, also these requirements from them perhaps, or formats for those. I will mention that there is a difference between the budget justification and facilities, equipment, and other resources, and my colleague Jean is going to talk about that, I suspect, when she talks specifically about the budgets. Senior personnel document there, in particular the bio sketches and the current and pending support, we'll come back to, because you need to use a science CV to create those documents, and that's a relatively new requirement. I will not talk about some of the other things at the moment, but other than to mention that proposals that do not contain these required sections will not be accepted. In fact, in research.gov or grants.gov, you can't actually submit a proposal unless these sections are there. And just as an example, if you're writing a preliminary proposal and the solicitation says do not include one of these sections, it's important that you actually have a page for that section that says not applicable, because otherwise it might be rejected in the submission process. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. The cover sheet, and I think this is a multi-slide section, but anyway, this is one of the first pages that anyone will see, and it gives a quick summary of what the proposal and the institution and the PI are all about, a very brief summary, but it's important to note here that many of these boxes on the cover sheet are electronically pre-filled as part of the process. And important with the research instrumentation program, there is a difference between the submitting organization and the institution where the activity will be occurring. And Jennifer also alluded to some of that as well. So that is a clear distinction that will be made throughout the proposal. I see Jean has chimed in because the next, she may have some comments, but the next slide is for Jean to speak to.
Thanks, Randy. I wanted to take a minute to address these lovely boxes that are included at the bottom of the slide here. We basically ask you to check some boxes when it comes to, are they relevant to what you are doing in the project that or proposal you're submitted to NSF. And I really wanted to take this opportunity because these check boxes, if you will, are very important to the foundation. Some of them are just, does your particular proposal include something like use of live vertebrate animals or human subjects? And if that's the case, they have to have necessary approvals by either your institutional animal care and use committee or your institutional review board before NSF can make an award based on this particular proposal to ensure that you have the necessary approvals in place. So that's one way that this information is used. We also have a couple of blocks here, funding of an international branch campus of a U.S. institution of higher education, or funding of a foreign organization. And in both of those, we're asking you to check the box if they're relevant, but we're also asking you to include in the proposal project description itself the justification for either giving it to an international branch campus or a foreign organization. So you need to know that in addition to checking that box, there's other very critical information that you have to include in the proposal. We also have boxes, for example, off-campus or off-site research that lets us know that there is this intent to carry out some of the activity off campus or off site, and your institution will be making the determination as to whether or not it is off campus or off site. And so the purpose, and then there is this other special exceptions to the deadline date policy, that if you do experience one of those natural or anthropogenic events, you would be checking that box. So I wanted to take this opportunity. These are not just, oh, I could just skip these, they're not really important. This is critical information to NSF on how to either process this proposal, on information that you will be including that we need to look for, you or our program staff or our reviewers. And so I wanted to make sure we had that opportunity to explain the purpose of these boxes on the cover sheet itself. So with that, let's turn it to the next slide and go back to Randy. Oh, sorry, Jen. Sorry, Jen.
Okay, we're all covering this. Okay, the project summary is sort of like the abstract or executive summary of the proposal, right? It's one page, and it needs to have an overview, a statement about the intellectual merit, and a statement about the broader impacts. This is often, other than the cover page, the first thing that a reviewer or a program director is going to read. And so this is your chance to get the reader excited about what you're proposing to do. It also helps us as program directors make a quick assessment about whether your proposal found the right home in the program. Next slide.
Could I make one more comment too? So you made a very, very good point about one of the first things your reviewer is going to see is this particular document called a project summary. One of the other things, though, and you're getting them excited, this is one of the first things you're seeing. But the point also is make sure that you're translating that excitement from the project description to a continued excitement over from the project summary to the project description. People get folks excited, and then they go to the project description and they're seeing a disconnect. Well, I got excited until now I'm really reading what they're planning on doing. So you're thinking of these things together, and it's a story you're telling, and make sure it's compelling in that you don't miss this opportunity to get them all enthused with the project summary, only to not carry that through to the actual project description itself.
I totally agree with that, Jean. It's like the setup, and then, ooh, you can really dig in the project description. Randy, did you want to add anything into that?
I just wanted to chime in quickly. In terms of the excitement, make sure that you're exciting the reviewers and not just yourself. It's for the PI and the co to get excited, but ultimately it's the reviewers you need to excite. So keep that in mind as you're writing your proposals, both the project description and the project summary. I'll stop there.
No, I agree with that too. I always tell people to especially the project summary or the project description, if you have some really good friends, find a smart friend and ask them to read it and tell you, are they excited about what you're doing? Do they understand what you're planning to do? That's an easy thing to do with the project summary for sure. And the project description, which we're on now, right? That's probably the biggest part of your proposal, page-wise, at least in a number of proposal types. So in most programs, right, this is where you have 15 pages to describe what you want to do, why you want to do it, who's going to do it, where, who would benefit from it, and how you'll know if you're successful, right? All of that in a compelling illustrated narrative. Of course, I say 15 pages, but that varies depending on what program you're submitting to and what kind of proposal it is. And you're not just describing your scientific approach here, you have to include a section describing the broader impacts of the proposed work. And I will reiterate that it's important to read the requirements and goals of the program you're submitting to, because that broader impact section might need to be really significant and integrated. There might be other requirements that you need to include in the project description, and that page limit, whether it's 5, 8, 15, 40 pages, has to fit in that. That limit is a limit. The PAPG contains a lot of guidance about what can and cannot go into the project description. And we clearly agree that it should convey a sense of excitement about what you want to do, needs to tell a story. I think knowing how your proposal is going to be reviewed, is it ad hoc review, just individual reviewers? Will there be a panel? This helps you target your proposal to an audience, right? It's not just going to be read by the same people that you work with who know exactly the kinds of experiments you do or the geographic place that you work. It's going to be read by a broad group of people, and you want it to be accessible to them. I always like to remind people that when you're writing, to remember that it's not a journal article, it's a proposal, and there are significant differences between the two things. So your tone and what you want to convey in this project description is different from a journal article, right? It's forward-looking, it's detailed, it's readable by smart non-experts. Okay, I could talk about this part of the proposal all day, but we've got more to cover. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, of course, you'll be citing references, and reviewers do pay a lot of attention to the literature and the other resources that you cite. So it's an important part of the proposal. How these are formatted really varies a little bit from discipline to discipline. So make sure that you're following the scholarly practices of your field when you build this section of your proposal.
Jennifer, can I just chime in with that?
Please.
Scene. Just make sure that the references cited and that within the proposal, sorry about that. I can do that. Just make sure that you cite not only references of yourself, which is of course important, or your co-PIs, but also of others outside of your research collaboration, so that the reviewers know that you have thought about the context of your research in the broader set of scientific questions and how it relates to what others are doing in that particular field. You'd be surprised at how many times you forget to do that. And one of the maze don't seem to understand how their work relates to that being done by others. So keep that very much in mind as you are.
Yeah, let me, that Randy's point is because this also is giving the reviewers, as Randy mentioned, a sense that you know what it is that you are actually proposing to do. You know the seminal articles, you know what is going on in that discipline. So of course, you're referencing those kind of items, but in terms of stepping back as a reviewer, again, the point is it's also giving them a sense of whether you know your discipline or not by what it is that you've included in references cited. So thanks, Randy, for raising that.
Jean, you can keep going with the budget if you'd like.
Lovely. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we need to understand about the budget and the budget justification is really, what are we trying to get in from you? What information do you need to include? And what is the purpose of that information? And the budget and budget justification, in combination with the next section that I'm going to talk about, facilities, equipment, and other resources, are what do you have access to the necessary resources to carry out the project as proposed? In the case of the budget and budget justification, funds you're asking for NSF, from NSF to compensate you for, and facilities, equipment, and other resources, which you and your collaborators will be bringing to the table to help conduct that research. So that's what these two sections are. And each proposal obviously has to have a budget for each of the years that you are requesting compensation for from NSF. And you see here a bunch of, this is how it will print out. And what's important to emphasize about the categories of things that we present here is it is very, very close to, for those of you that submit proposals to other federal funding agencies, this has very much been harmonized among the federal research agencies to have the same categories of budget categories, if you will, as other agencies. And so that will certainly be helpful for you to be aware of, so that when you're preparing a proposal for NSF, it will, ultimately speaking, hopefully help you prepare to other federal research funding agencies as well. The typical NSF proposal shouldn't have more than 5 years for all the project combined, unless the funding opportunity tells you differently. And we do have a few programs that fall into that. And if you include a subaward, another organization helping you conduct that research you're proposing to do, that's a subawardee, there would also be a separate budget justification for each of the subawards that is up to 5 pages for all of the years combined. So again, the important point to walk away when you're thinking about the budget and budget justification is, do you have all the necessary resources to carry out the project as proposed? What do you need? So we're constantly asked that at these grants conferences, and I've done about 50 of these so far, is how much do I ask for? Well, you ask for what it is you need. The reviewers that are looking at this are experts in this field. They're going to be looking at it from a perspective of, do you have everything you need to conduct this project? Are you asking for things that go well beyond what it is that you need to do? Do you really understand what it is you're proposing? So the document definitely fits together, and the budget is one of the pieces that's going to talk and answer the resources question. Next slide.
Jean, can I add? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I just wanted to add one thing here, which is sometimes for some reason, people think they can't ask for broader impacts activity funding.
Okay.
Ask for money for your broader impacts. Like, we don't expect you to do science for free. We also do not expect people to achieve the required broader impacts in a proposal for free either. I just wanted to take this chance to say that because
that's
I feel like I
lovely
have to tell people
contribution.
that all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Randy,
And
you wanted to say something too.
I had a couple of things, and one was Jean mentioned specifically the subawards need to have a budget justification. I just wanted to mention that when an award is made, there are sometimes budget negotiations, and you will submit a revised budget, both either as just the lead organization or a lead organization and subawardees. All of those documents need to have a budget justification as well. There's nothing quite so irritating as looking at a revised budget that doesn't have a justification for what the revisions are all about. So please make sure that that is there as well. And the other thing that I did want to mention is that the budget is a good place for you to demonstrate that you are a project manager at some level. We all know that PIs are good scientists. That's why they were hired at universities. But these projects are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And while you don't need to have a project management degree or training necessarily, you are managing a large scale project, even though it's not the biggest of big. But please make sure that the budget justification, as Jean has mentioned, is your place to shine, to show that you know what you're doing. It's another component of being a good scientist. Thank you.
Next slide, please. That was just a very high level, and thank you to my colleagues for providing some additional amplification there of things you may want to know about the budget. But let's talk a bit about when you're thinking about the budget. Obviously, the PAP guide has a lot of information. Every one of the budget categories that we talk about on the budget, there is a detailed description of that. And so obviously the purpose of this is not to have you stop reading. You obviously are going to have to read this section of the proposal. This is intended to really provide you that high level, what should you be thinking about, or points that you should be thinking about. So again, there's a lot of information both in the PAP guide as well as in perhaps a solicitation that goes into some more detail. But you need to think about the fact that, as I've kind of already mentioned, does this make sense? And if somebody reviewing it who does this kind of research, is it realistic and reasonable for what you want to do? Obviously, if you have got a budget category filled in, you should have a corresponding section to that budget justification to make sure you are saying, why is it that you need it? And it needs to be consistent, again, with the guidelines, if there are any, in a particular program solicitation. So we go through on this slide the costs. Obviously, personnel, and a very important line about this is that as a general principle, each faculty member is senior key person rather is entitled to no more than 2 person months of their regular salary in any 1 year. And yes, it's the institution that makes that determination of what constitutes a year. You can ask for more, but again, the budget justification needs to justify why that would be necessary. But again, it's 2 months across all NSF funded awards, NSF funded grants, and it's important to emphasize you can do more or put more, but you've got to justify. Obviously, there are other categories for the equipment that you would like to purchase, travel, participant support. We put the definition here because most people have no true clear idea of what participant support is. And those are costs for items such as stipends or subsistence, travel, registration, that are paid on or behalf of participants or trainees that are in connection with NSF-sponsored conferences or training projects. That is when you see that category most frequently used. That's not to say it could not be on a research proposal if you've got a training activity built within that particular activity, but I just wanted to make you aware that participant support is the definition, and those are when it is most frequently used. And there are also other direct costs that we mention here as well. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned in the beginning that you've got the budget, which says what resources you need that you're asking for compensation from NSF. Facility, equipment, and other resources is the resources available to perform the effort for both intellectual merit and broader impacts that are provided by you or one of your collaborating organizations. So this is really important to also understand that when we say all resources, those are for this particular project. So some folks were seeing stuff come in like my computer gave me a laptop, or I do have this particular instrument in my lab. Well, it's the instrument in your lab if indeed you need it to carry out the research as proposed. So I wanted to make that, but you need to think to these two sections of the proposal together to look at what resources, either from NSF or from you or your collaborating organization, to ensure you can answer that question of do you have the resources necessary. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Randy for the biographical sketch. Or did I get that wrong again?
No, I think that's you, Jean.
Oh, biographical sketch. Oh, my apologies. So the biographical sketch, you've got your resources over here. Over here, one of the other questions that the merit review criteria ask is, does the individual or team have the necessary qualifications to carry out the research as proposed? And we have a requirement that every senior key person has to have a biographical sketch. It's 3 pages in length. And as Randy mentioned, we recently moved to you must use Science CV, which is out of the National Library of Medicine, to prepare your biographical sketch. And this just shows you going into the National Library of Medicine, you would click the NSF biographical sketch, and it walks you through the various pieces of the biographical sketch that you're going to need to complete. And then it would be uploaded and added to your proposal. But again, this must be in Science CV. Now, the beauty is that you could use this again. If this is a particular biographical sketch and you've got another proposal, again, for something different, not for this, but you can actually modify these or tailor these. You can do as many as you want in Science CV so that you have access to this information and we can reduce the administrative burden to the extent possible. Next slide, please. So the current and pending other support falls into the same category. This is information on all your current and pending support for ongoing projects and proposals. Well, we've talked about the budget, that's resources, facilities, equipment, and other resources. Again, that's resources. Your biographical sketch, that's your qualifications. And the current and pending other support, what we're trying to figure out, that and our reviewers are does the individual have the capacity to carry out the research as proposed, or to assess whether there is any overlap or duplication with the proposal you're currently submitting. Like this, you currently have to submit it in Science CV as of October of 2023. And so we just want to make sure that you're aware of this new requirement to prepare it in Science CV and the fact that this tool can be modified each time to help relieve that administrative burden. Next slide, please.
Jean, before you leave the current pending and the
Yeah.
biographical sketch, and I realize this is maybe more related to the merit review process, but one of the questions in the Q&A was there is a need to revise these two documents at least before an award is made. And again, that's jumping the gun. But the question was, is this something that is being standardized and is it here to stay?
The answer is yes. I think that's a wonderful question, Randy. And the reason that this requirement came into play is that their NSF is a member of the Research Security Subcommittee. That's a subcommittee of the National Science and Technology Council. And one of the changes in the research security space that was implemented last year in the 23 version of the PAP guide was that you had to actually update your current and pending other support, not your biosketch, but your current and pending other support, if a program officer is going to recommend you for an award. So before they can recommend you, they've got to go out and ask for the PI and all senior personnel to update their current and pending other support. So that is a new requirement. I didn't put that in here because, again, it's only if indeed you're being considered for funding, if you will. But the purpose is to ensure NSF has the latest information available to ensure that the individual or team has the capacity to carry out this research. So thanks for asking that question.
Okay, I think this is now my turn to close out this session. But I earlier had mentioned the difference between a single copy document, which is seen by NSF only, and what I've loosely called supplemental documentation, which is formally called special information and supplementary documentation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now. And it's composed of three sections, if you will. Here, one is the letters of collaboration, which I prefer to think of in terms of statements of collaboration, which I'll come back to in a few moments. A data management plan and a postdoc mentoring plan, and then other supplemental documentation, supplementary documentation. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that may be solicitation dependent as well. So next slide, please. So I've already mentioned the collaboration letters, and I prefer statements of collaboration. And there's a suggested text here, and it's strongly suggested in some ways, that says, if the proposal submitted by Dr. and insert the name of the PI, entitled in the proposal title, is selected for funding by NSF, it is my intent to collaborate and or commit resources as detailed in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. I will take some credit for this. I don't know if historical ritual letters will actually confirm this, but this was first, as far as I know, indicated in the major research instrumentation program, and it was then followed up by some of our colleagues in chemistry and made its way into other programs, and now is ensconced in the PEP guide. But basically, this is a statement of collaboration that says that you will undertake the activities as described in the proposal. It gets around that fact that letters of collaboration in the past often were, this is the greatest proposal since sliced bread, the project will do this, that, and the other thing. It was, number one, a way to usurp the 15-page project description limit, if that was the limit that is listed in the solicitation, is typically the number in the PAP guide. But it also is a review of the proposal that is, number one, conflicted and terribly unuseful to the program officers, because the people who are telling us its virtues are the ones who are actually going to benefit from it. So we would never use them as reviewers. So having them as writing was a little bit more information, really terribly useful, at least in terms of most people's perspective. So now this is a statement of collaboration, and I highly recommend that one uses it and makes sure that the project description and the facilities, equipment, and other resources, or both one or both of those, describes what those activities are going to be. So there, I've gotten off my soapbox there for the.
Well, can I just add a little bit to the soapbox? Sorry. It is though not a required statement, because we do have, particularly when you're dealing with for-profit organizations, they want to be much more precise about what they are or not providing. And so a lot of times they actually will amplify this in the particular letter of collaboration. And so I just wanted to make sure people understood it's a great best practice, but it's not absolutely. And there may be some situations where your collaborator will refuse to comply with this. So I just wanted to make that people aware.
I will just quickly mention before, I think Jennifer has some. Will just in the MRI solicitation, it describes that very circumstance where if you're contributing as an institution in particular, like a small business or a nonprofit or on behalf of a company as opposed to an individual at the company, you can include a letter of collaboration up to one letter, because we can't control what those institutions are willing to provide on the institution's behalf. But if it's an individual at the institution, we encourage them to use this very compact statement of collaboration. So I will, Jennifer, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to give another example of solicitation that allowed deviation. So, but you did a great job. That's all.
Oh, okay. So we've had examples for, again, not to go too far into the weeds, but for example, the Large Hadron Collider in Europe is a big collaborative effort. And if we provide something for them, they want to have a letter of collaboration indicating that they accept the device in their large-scale facility. And it's not a small statement of collaboration here. It's a very large collaboration, and they do require something a little bit more larger in terms of their description of their contribution. So as Jean points out, this is strongly encouraged, and there are exceptions. The other thing that sorry about the ambulance going down the street. The thing here too is that all relevant collaborative activities should be described in the project description one way or other. And the facilities in section, for example, such as intellectual contributions to the project, permission to access a site. I think we've had some discussion of that in earlier comments, and also in the questions and answers. There were questions about that. Offers to furnish samples, samples from, for example, from asteroid retrieval. If you're doing studies on ground-based astronomy, for example, that require an understanding of asteroids. Logistical support or evaluation services, logistical support, for example, if you're doing something in the polar region. So there are exceptions, as Jean correctly and wisely pointed out. Next slide, please. And then there are, of course, the mentoring of postdoctoral research, and that's been around for some time. So I won't dwell too much on it, but it's important to note that proposals that include funding to support postdoctoral researchers must include a description of the mentoring activities, and there'll be examples of what that might mean here coming up here in the next few moments. It will be evaluated as part of the merit review process under the broader impacts merit review criteria, or even in some cases, people might think it's more of an intellectual merit, but certainly it's a broader impact. Proposals that identify a postdoctoral research on the budget line, but do not include a maximum one-page mentoring plan, will be prevented for submission. We talked a little bit earlier about the fact that research.gov or grants.gov requires certain documents to be there. And this is one example of that in the past, we had to scour the proposal to see whether or not there was something on line G5 that requested a postdoc, and then see whether or not there was a mentoring plan. Now, the systems will check for us. So we are progressing perhaps slower than we would like, or PIs, the PI community or the SRO, SPO community would like, but we are moving forward into the 21st century. So for collaborative proposals, the lead organization must submit a mentoring plan for postdoctoral research submitted under the entire collaborative proposal project. So that's important. There doesn't need, in a collaborative, separately submitted collaborative proposals, there only needs to be the postdoc mentoring plan in the lead organization's proposal. Next slide, please. So some of those examples, and I'm not going to go through this list in detail because providing a list means that you either, number one, pick out one of those things to the exclusion of anything else, or you try and check the box and put everything into your proposal. And that is, neither of those approaches is necessarily appropriate. It's what is appropriate for your particular project if you are including a postdoctoral researcher in to be funded in your project. So please make sure that you think about, this is a non-comprehensive list, and it shows some of the things that might be appropriate for a postdoctoral mentoring plan, but do think about what is appropriate for your particular project. Next slide. And the data management plan requirements, and I will leave openings for my colleagues to talk about this, but all proposals are required to include as a supplemental document in the section that's indicated a data management plan for up to 2 pages, a description of how the proposal will conform to NSF policy on dissemination and sharing of research results. A data management plan that's valid may include only the statement that no detailed plan is needed as long as a clear justification is provided. And I do want to elaborate, number one, on that. And that is that, again, these are going to be evaluated as part of the merit review process, which you'll hear about later on. But it is important, if you say that no data management plan is required, that you explain to reviewers clearly and reasonably and appropriately why that is the case. Because almost all reviewers are going to look at 10, 15 proposals individually and collectively a panel, maybe 20 to 30 proposals, the majority of which are going to have a 1 to 2 page data management plan. And if they come across one that says no data management plan is needed, and maybe a brief description, they're going to flag that one and say, why is that this is the only one that doesn't? And you need to be very concise and very clear as to why you have decided that no valid data management plan is needed. The other aspect here is that, again, the plan will be reviewed as part of the intellectual merit or broader impact. So I already mentioned that reviewers are going to be looking for that. So if you don't have one, just make sure that you explain it very well. Stepping aside, talking about the MRI program. MRI is a data acquisition. Sorry, it's an instrumentation acquisition and development program. We don't fund the research. So a lot of people will wonder, why do we need to have a data management plan? Because we're not undertaking any research, so we don't have to follow the NSF policies on dissemination and sharing of research results because we don't have any. Well, just for the record, for those of you considering MRI proposals, there's no place better to incorporate a data management plan than when you're developing or acquiring an instrument to make it easier for your NSF-funded PIs, researchers, to follow the NSF policies on research dissemination. So having a data management plan, even in an instrumentation program, is highly recommended because that's the best place to ensure that there is an ease of providing those documents as necessary, those descriptions as necessary. down the road. So keep that in mind if you're doing an instrumentation proposal, sorry. Next slide, please. And there are often questions about data management plans. Again, NSF funds basically all fields of science and engineering. So what applies in my is not necessarily the same that applies in Jennifer's Earth Sciences programs or Geosciences programs, I should say. I'm sorry, it's getting late in this presentation. Certainly not within engineering or social behavior sciences. So you should, if you have questions, speak to a program officer in your particular field to understand better what is expected of a data management plan within various directorates and divisions within directorates. So next slide, please. Well, sorry, to that end, can you go back one slide? I apologize. But to that end, there is a possibility to discuss with the program officers about that. And there's a page that provides the requirements for the data management plan that isn't there in the little tiny fonts. So you can actually, and you'll get these slides. So please make sure that you understand the data management plan before you actually create one, because it's important for you to understand what is appropriate within your community for this kind of a document. And finally, last slide, please. The mantra of the NSF grants conferences is ask early, ask often. And then there are some jokes that I'll refrain from regarding that phrase, but it is very true. So there are a number of ways to do that. One is, of course, the NSF website, finding the staff members who you think are appropriate for yourself. I find it most easiest to find who's in the area that I would be interested in by looking at the org list. Yes, we are in the government. One of the slides we always tend to fortuitously for this presentation, we did not, is an org list documenting the whole flow of various offices and directorates within NSF, for example. But if you search on the website, the org list for NSF Geosciences, and then more polar programs, and then look for programs that are within the polar programs, and then maybe who the program officer or officers are within an area you might be interested in. That's one great way to identify particular individuals. And as I'm not sure was emphasized too much here, NSF has a permanent staff. I am a permanent staff member, have been now for almost, well, it's over 16 years. But before that, I was what is called a rotator. And there are two kinds of rotators. One is through the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, and I was that as well for 3 years in the astronomy division before I became permanent. And there you are borrowed from your university. So you're still on your university or institutional or organizational payroll. But NSF provides a grant, in essence, to that organization to buy out your time. And you are working then at NSF for NSF, but you are not employed by NSF. The other one is a visiting science engineer and educator, or some permutation that it's a VSEE, where you actually take a leave of absence from your organization. And there you are considered a temporary employee of the National Science Foundation. So there is a great way to learn a lot in a short period of time, typically 2 to 3 years, about how NSF works. So please do ask often, contact your program officers. If you don't hear back from them right away, contact them again. That's why we are here collectively, but it is, as you may notice, there's several thousand people on this particular webinar. So we do get overwhelmed at times. So it's hard to get a quick response. Please keep trying if you don't get an answer right off the bat. So I will then turn it back over to Jeremy and leave time for answering questions, of which there were many in the Q&A function, and I don't think many of them were able to be answered because we've been interactive amongst ourselves, making comments, but we'll hopefully be able to address as many of them as possible. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Randy, and thank you, Jean and Jennifer. Yes, we did get a lot of questions in. We have actually been answering quite a bit, at least according to my count here. We've answered almost 90 questions, but we still have more than 90 open. So we certainly won't get to all of them. But what I do want to say before we get into these questions, that one, a lot of these questions are frequently asked questions, and we do have answers to a lot of your questions already posted on the Policy Office website, and we're going to drop into the chat some links to a number of those frequently asked questions, whether they are related to current and pending support or just general proposal related questions. So look for links to those in the chat. The other thing that I would mention is that we saw a lot of questions that were very specific in nature to proposals that you're preparing. So when if you do have specific questions about a proposal that you're submitting to a specific funding opportunity at NSF, we recommend that you contact the program office to ask those questions. And again, if you have questions related to a specific award that you have, we recommend that you start with the cognizant grants officer that is identified in the award notice that you received when you got the award. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is I tried to note down questions that I think would be most beneficial to everyone here. And I wanted to start off just by getting some general questions we had early on. Jean talked about the PAP guide. And so I wanted to, have you, Jean, if you could talk about the timeline for release of the PAP guide, both generally and in the coming year. And then also wrapping into that, when you're submitting to NSF and you're following the guidance in the current PAP guide, but then a new PAP guide comes out after you've submitted your proposal, how do you square that circle in terms of dealing with PAP guides?
Sorry, you would think by now I would know that you have to turn your mute off. Very good questions. Particularly the timing question is a little bit unusual this year. So typically we put out a PAP guide in April, get public comment for 60 days, resolve those comments, and then in October, we post the new PAP guide with an effective date in January of that coming calendar year. And so that would mean we would be having a new PAP guide already posted. We do not. The reason we do not is that NSF, and I'm going to be talking, I'm not going to give too much information here because I'm going to be talking about this quite a bit on Thursday when I do the policy update. But it is clear that because of some of the other things that we are implementing, we will not be having a PAP guide that goes into effect in January of 2024. There will be one coming out very shortly. We have received final clearance from OMB, but we have not identified the absolute effective date in 2024 yet, but stay tuned. And there's going to be a lot more information about this on the Thursday session. When it comes to which PAP guide do you have to follow, we have a process in place where we every year specify that the new PAP guide, when it is implemented, again, we will be telling you, is for proposals submitted or due on or after the effective date of the PAP guide. And we have a very great process in place where if you submit it early, but the deadline date means you have to comply with this version of the PAP guide, we will go back to you and let you know when, before that effective date, hey, you used an old PAP guide, you're going to need to revise it. Or you may need to revise it to comply with the new version of the PAP guide. So we have very definite rules in place proposals submitted or due on or after the effective date are the ones that would be required to comply with the new PAP guide requirements.
Jean, can I just
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One of the questions I think related to if you submitted a proposal with a certain PAP guide and then you received an award, and again, this is
Well,
different.
those are two. Yeah, that gets into a totally different situation because you must comply with, in any award, irrespective of the PAP guide, you must comply with the terms and conditions that are referenced in the award that you receive. That's what we will be requiring you to comply with. We have a process in place to ensure that every year we update the new terms and conditions to comply with the PAP guide. But your particular award will comply with whatever terms or conditions are incorporated by reference into that award. Jen, you wanted to add something as well. Oh, you did. Okay, sorry.
Okay, well, one of the great things about having these sessions is that we're able to dispel rumors. And so I have a few questions here that are really falling into that category of dispelling rumors. And the first one is, can you talk about project description requirements in terms of page length? We have 15-page project description requirement, but there are people thinking, oh, I've heard that some proposals have an 8-page limit and others have another page limit. Can you talk a little bit about what the actual requirements are?
Do you? Go ahead, Jen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Most programs, most regular proposals to like what we call the core programs are 15-page proposals. That's going to be the majority of everything that is submitted. Some things like conference proposals or workshop proposals, rapids, eagers, those kinds of mechanisms do have shorter page limits. They can be shorter and they should be shorter. And that's all listed in the PAPG under those mechanisms.
And we auto compliance check those based on whether you check the rapid or eager box on the cover sheet. That's why those are very important for you to check.
Right. And then some of the big, and this is really Randy's wheelhouse, but the sort of large, especially infrastructure, instrumentation proposals, those often have a larger for facilities, things like that. I don't know, Randy, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, those are always discussed in the solicitation. So just pay close attention to the solicitation.
Right.
The second, what I would call rumor, surrounds URLs in documents. Now, they're not acceptable to be included in the project description, but there's we've seen some debate within the community as to whether they're allowed in other sections of the proposal. So can you talk a little bit about where they are allowed and where they're not permitted?
Well, I think I'll take this one. They are allowed where we tell you they're allowed. So, for example, you can, the biographical sketch, we actually, in fact, infer that you may want to have one use a URL so that a reviewer could go out and check what it is that you put out there to see if they believe you do have the necessary qualifications to carry out the research as proposed. Our biggest concern areas are places where we have identified a page limitation. So project description has a page limitation. The postdoc mentoring plan, the data management plan, places where we have specifically called out having a page limitation. Well, by definition, if you include a URL, all bets are off. It's not that page limitation anymore. You could have gone to several thousands of pages. So where we're particularly concerned about, and by the way, we do auto compliance check these in most cases. If it has a page limitation, you can't have an outside URL because by definition, that would be exceeding that page limitation. So that's the best way. Obviously, we don't have one in references cited because you could have more. As many references as you may want. We don't have a reference on current and pending other support set of page limitations because you can have as many as you need to have. So those are the kinds of basic rules that you would need to follow about the inclusion of URLs. Randy or Jen, anything to add to that?
Okay, next question is about submitting similar proposals. So what is NSF's position in submitting similar proposals to different solicitations if the proposal speaks to both of those different solicitations? And then just to add in, how does this work with submitting proposals to different funding agencies?
So I'll start.
Yeah, you start and I'm
Please jump in. So if there's a project that really combines two disciplines, often that can be handled with one proposal that a couple different programs co-review. That happens all the time. We do it a lot. Whether you can indicate on the cover page, I'd like this to be considered by two programs. Also, any proposal that comes into my program, one of the first things that I do is read it and say, I wonder if there's another program that might be interested in sharing this proposal. So that's to the sort of like,
hint, they may actually be providing money, which would help the program officer.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking, we were talking about myth dispelling. Let me dispel a myth right here.
Yeah.
People think that if more than one program reviews a proposal, it's less likely to get funded. The opposite is true. We've looked at the data. Actually, it's more likely. So that happens a lot. If you submit to two different programs, we can see that, and you're not going to get both of them funded. We also can see, because of your current pending support, if you've submitted something, for example, this happens in our program, to NSF and to NASA, it is reported. We talk to the people at NASA while those are under review to figure out, if it's something that we want to recommend for funding. We're not going to do that without talking to the other agency. Anything to add?
Well, let me add one minor detail, and that has to do with the last piece you talk about other funding agencies. So we do have one directorate, the Biological Sciences Directorate, that says you cannot simultaneously submit. You cannot submit for simultaneous consideration. Review by NSF and read, in this case, NIH, at the same time without prior approval. And so there is a box you have to check on the cover sheet, but that applies to the Biological Sciences Directorate only. And there is an entire piece on that in the PEP guide about when you would check that box and how that, but typically you are free to send in a proposal to NSF and another funding agency. Again, Jen's right. We often communicate with them because we want to know whether you're funding it or they, but the bottom line is the Biological Sciences is the one that has a very specific prohibition against doing that unless certain things occur.
I will just add that that's where the current and pending support document comes in. And it has to make sure that it is up. So if you two proposals, one to NSF and one to NASA, for example, both of those better be listed on the current and pending support.
Correct.
Keep that in mind.
That's a really good segue, because when we started talking about current and pending support, the volume of questions increased tremendously. So before we do go, I do want to ask some general questions about current and pending, which I think will help to clear up any confusion that folks have. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about the difference between what is provided in current and pending support and what is provided in the budget and budget justification, because I think there is some confusion there, and we've seen it, outside of this conference as questions come into the policy office.
Okay, so this is the budget is how much you're asking for from NSF for that particular individual. So in the case of you're talking here, if a person puts 2 person months on there, that is what the budget is intended to do. What resources are you asking for NSF compensation for? And so they'll put that amount on the budget and an amount, obviously, of person months associated with that. Current and pending and other support has nothing to do with that, because many faculty members do not get any, do ask for any compensation on the budget at all. What current and pending, one is how much money do you want from NSF? The other has to really do with capacity. So you may only be asking for 2 months support from NSF, but you know it will take you 6 months to carry out that particular part of the project that you are reporting under current and pending other support. And so one is about how much money you want from NSF, and the other is how much time is it going to take you to carry out that part of the research activity? Two completely different questions. And so no matter how hard we try, we cannot seem to divorce the two. People think it's one or the other. No, it is, you're answering two very different questions in that part of the question that you're asking.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for this session. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.